For those of you on the commission and everyone in the audience, I am trying to make sure that the live stream goes. We do stream live to YouTube, so please stand by. All right, everyone. Well, despite the fact that the live stream won't go, we are going to go ahead and start the teleconference. Welcome to the Library Advisory Commission meeting for September 21st. This meeting is being recorded and hopefully streamed live to YouTube. To join this webinar using a telephone only, please dial any of the following numbers. I'll read a couple of them aloud. 1-833-548-0276 or 1-877-853-5247, and then slowly enter the webinar ID of 953-2879-8258. As an attendee, this meeting is being recorded and streamed to YouTube. Your microphone is muted for the entire presentation. We are not taking open mic comments. You do not need a microphone, camera, or a screen if you only want to listen to the meeting, as this meeting is accessible by landline or mobile phone. If you need assistance, please call the library's telephone information line at 1-831-427-7713. The Commission will take public comment as outlined in the posted agenda and in the next slides. All comments must include the agenda item number and be received prior to the close of public comment on that agenda item. If you're joining by computer, you may use the Q&A feature to type your questions or comments. Down at the bottom on the Zoom attendee control bar, you'll see the Q&A icon. In the lower left corner, you'll see audio settings, then the Q&A icon, and then leave in a red rectangle. If you're using a mobile device, the Zoom control bar and Q&A icon will appear near the top of your screen. In reverse order, you'll see Leave Meeting in red letters in the upper left corner, and then Q&A, and then perhaps 3 dots for more. Alternatively, you may call the library's telephone information line to timely submit your comments at 1-831-427-7713. These will be read by the moderator. Once the commission begins, if you're joining by computer, to see all the panelists, you may need to use the Zoom control bar and select Gallery View. Depending on the size of your mobile device screen, you may need to scroll over to view whomever's speaking. If you're accessing this meeting via the web browser only or a Chromebook, you will not see all panelists at one time, only the panelists speaking. I'll now turn it over to the chair of the commission, Bob White, and he'll call the meeting to order. Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Moderator Jones. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob White, and I would like to call the Monday, September 21st, 2020 regular meeting of the Library Advisory Commission to order. And I'd like to ask Clerk Samano Vargas, may we have a roll call, please?
Lindsay Bass.
Here.
Bruce Cotter.
Here.
Rena Dubin.
Here.
Jim Landreth. Jim Landreth.
Jim, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm here. Thank you.
No worries. Mary Ripma.
Here.
Bob White.
Here.
And Trisha Wynn.
Here.
Okay, we're called to order. We do have a quorum. So next we have the adoption of the agenda. So let's move to that. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move approval of the agenda.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, Bruce is second, so we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Aye. I say aye, I forgot to vote. So, okay. So the agenda passes. Next is oral communications. And let me just read this briefly. Any member of the audience may address the board on any matter, either on or off the agenda that is within the board's jurisdiction. Note, however, that the board is not able to undertake extended discussion or act upon non-agendized items. Such items can be referred to staff for appropriate action, which may include placement on a future agenda. If you intend to address a subject that is on the agenda, please hold your comments regarding that item till it's before the board, so we may properly address all comments on the subject at the same time. In general, 3 minutes will be permitted per speaker during oral communications. A maximum of 30 minutes is set aside for oral communications at this time. Moderator Jones, is there any oral communications at this time?
Commissioner White, there are no public comments at this time.
Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 4. And that is the, actually 2 reports by the library director, Susan.
And Eric and I were double booked tonight, so I'm glad to see him here. Eric, feel free to jump in if you see the need. The last month, sorry, I shouldn't start to laugh. The last month has been interesting. Since we saw you last, of course, we had the fires. We had 3 libraries in the evacuation area. We had about a third of our staff physically displaced from their homes. It was a difficult month, and we got through it. We did close the 3 libraries in the evacuation areas, but we left Live Oak, Aptos, and downtown open during the vast majority of the time. Very grateful, I have to say, to first responders. I went up and visited Boulder Creek yesterday, and it is really within a quarter mile of the branch. If you've ever seen the Boulder Creek Library, one thing you should know is as you join this, we'll be going to different libraries and having these meetings, so you get to see them all in normal times. But the Boulder Creek Library is an all wood building, shingle building with a wood roof. So it really did take some effort on the part of our firefighters and community to protect that building, and we're really, really grateful for it. We tried to serve as best we could in the EOC. We did things like bring laptops, charging stations, offer staff. What we've struggled with since the fire is air quality and actually some union issues about doing curbside outside when the air quality gets above 150. And we've been working with our unions, OSHA, and the city HR office. I do have to say that different people have different interpretations, but our interpretation was once the air quality got over 150, it necessitated a whole bunch of equipment and training we weren't feeling very prepared to offer. Now, I have to say we've had more air quality days than I ever anticipated. And I also included an article from the Bay Area talking about other library systems and the choices that they're making. I think a lot of library systems have been closing their curbside with air quality over 150. Is it the right answer? I'm not 100% sure. I think it became the answer that satisfied the most constituencies, in all honesty. And we'll get into further discussions. I'll move on to the facilities. I have to say there's just a lot of really great things happening with the facilities. The Aptos Design Committee has they hired Bogart Construction, Anderson Brule Architects. We haven't had the chance to work with Anderson Brule yet. Very famous library design firm in the Bay Area. Very fun to be working with a new team. I have to compliment the friends, put two great, experienced, awesome friends on the design team. And so we've been having fun. Sorry, so we had planned next Monday, and I sent you an invitation to attend a design review meeting for the public. And unfortunately, we have to change the date of that meeting to the 5th. So I will resend that invitation to you. I really hope you can attend. I think you'll find the whole process very interesting. It's going to be interesting to try to do this online, but the architect has some really interesting approaches to talking about both the external design and the internal design. I do want to say that this is our 4th public community meeting on Aptos, so it's kind of the last design before we pick colors and things. I think you'll enjoy it though. Boulder Creek, we finished the second bidding process. We got approval of a contract with CRW Industries for construction, and we have to be completely out of the building in the next 3 weeks, so we're scrambling. And you can see a picture there of what the children's room is supposed to look like at the end. I just want to remind people that Boulder Creek is one of our newer libraries, so this remodel is really taking portions of the building and remodeling. It's not an entire remodel of the entire facility. Branson 40 and Garfield Park are submitting permits, going through permit review. Capitol is going like gangbusters, so we're getting really, really excited. Tomorrow with the City Council of Santa Cruz, they will approve a recommendation for a project manager. We're recommending an organization called Griffin Companies, and they are a professional project management firm in California that has strong experience with libraries and housing. And so I think that's going to bring, and they've got a financial unit that will really help us with sort of writing the legal documents and the funding documents to make that complex project potentially succeed. Pretty much finishing out Felton. There's a little money left. We've got some work to do on Gushy. The Friends still have resources, so they're going to set aside some money to do some improvements and add a little wow to the teen area, but we're probably going to save that till next year when we can have more teens in the building helping us think about it. And they're going to give some resources to the park. And I took a picture of La Selva Beach. It's pretty exciting and looking very attractive. Live Oak Annex continues to meet. And I think we're almost to submitting construction documents for permitting there as well. So the projects continue to move forward, and we're very excited about them. I'm going to go, as part of our agenda, into where we're going to go next operationally, but I just wanted to sort of bring you up to speed about where we've been in the last 8 weeks, and I was curious if you had any questions.
Susan, I'm curious.
Okay.
I probably should have raised my hand like Bruce did.
That's okay.
Have the architects recommended any upgrades to the air cleaning systems in the buildings to make us ready for possible future aerosol transmitted, no matter what the CDC did on their website today, aerosol transmitted viruses? Is that something that we're building into our thinking?
Jim, I have to research it. It came up this afternoon. I'm amazed not earlier at a meeting. We're putting in I think every case new HVAC systems except for the Live Oak building. And there is a real opportunity to do this. We know we have some major air quality issues, particularly downtown, but I don't know. I don't know exactly where we're at, and I'll go and review that. Jim, one of the things we talked about this afternoon is how good the science is on air filters actually being able to filter out virus particles. Have you read anything or heard anything that might help me think about that?
No, I'm sorry to say I haven't, other than references to places like hospitals being much more better equipped to filter the air there than your average office building or commercial building like a library.
I'm also,
there must be technology out there.
I'm also curious, I see that you can buy things online on Amazon. If any of those things actually have merit, I don't know.
I don't know either. I suspect maybe not, but it's worth researching because I certainly don't know.
I will do that research. It's a really timely moment.
I'm not sure it is no. You know, I don't know. I'm sure there'll be firms that make claims, but whether or not they hold up to, I mean, we're so knee deep in this that it doesn't seem like they're doing research right now. It's just trying to get the you know, some sort of a cure, but we don't quite know even how it's transmitted. But so I just something I've wondered about, you know, and we probably should be, I would think.
Asking the question. Yeah, we should be asking this question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Bruce, you had a question?
Yeah, with reference to Boulder Creek, you have a comment about unanticipated revenue in the amount of $175,000 that the Board of Supervisors accepted. Can you tell me a little more about that? That's new to me.
It was unanticipated to them, but it was planned by the Friends of the Library. And this is part of the Monterey Bay Peninsula Foundation.
Oh, all right.
And the Friends have already matched the $100,000. When I talked to the Friends about it, they wanted to hold $25,000 back of the $200,000 that they've raised, and just be able to do some sort of fun things in the building, more whimsical than infrastructure. So that.
Are you talking about the Friends of the Boulder Creek Library, which, as far as I know, doesn't exist?
I talked
about the Friends of the Santa Cruz Public Library.
Yeah, the 501c3 I talked to.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional questions from the commission regarding the two reports, the operations report and also the facilities report? Rena?
Hi, Rena.
Hi. I just wanted to say I think it's great that you're waiting for the Felton teams, that you're waiting to be sure that they have a chance to live in the space before there's a lot more construction and things happening. But I hope that that money can be really set aside for them, because I know, you know, in a couple months, whenever we can get back in that building, I know that it will be a lovely kind of way to recreate it. So,
And get them engaged.
yes.
Thank you. I agree.
Are there any other comments from the commission before we go to public comments?
Commissioner White, Lindsay Bass has been attempting to unmute, so let's see how things have gone.
Lindsay?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I was just going to ask a quick question, and it doesn't seem like the timing around these types of things ever is ideal, but given the recent fires, and I know that you all are also working on helping to facilitate dialogue about resilience in our community, and I'm just wondering, given the fact that we have 3 branches up in the mountains that are vulnerable to fire activity, if this has created a learning opportunity for lessons learned on, any kind of adjustments that can be made to existing buildings or planned construction efforts that are getting underway. So I'm just flagging that, knowing that to re-engineer things is always very costly. And sometimes to build in that resilience, that's very hard to do at this stage of the project. But any learnings that you guys can gather at this point, I think is beneficial for the future.
Do you want to say, and this was prior to the fire, this was last spring, the county did a really lovely job sitting down sort of all the interest groups and saying, how did this process work and how did this process not work? And I have to say, I am very impressed because I see them incorporating those lessons learned, particularly on the Aptos project, where there's been heavy community involvement in the way there was heavy community involvement in Felton. It's really difficult though, because we have 4 different jurisdictions managing their own projects, and they go about them in really different ways. So I wish we could do that more universally. I do have to say though, Lindsay, I think I feel like the last 6 months we've just been treading our water, trying to keep our nose above. And I think we probably really need to do some of that work with the staff because we have learned a lot of lessons and we've also made a lot of mistakes. Eric, I just don't know if Eric's worked really hard on the resilience project, and it would be interesting to have lessons learned from within the community, potentially as a project within the next 3 months as people get their feet under themselves. Do you have any comments on that, Eric?
Hi, thank you. I think it's a really exceptional idea to kind of engage the community that's been most affected by the fires, to see from their perspective what has helped and what supports that they see are still needed. I know from a facilities perspective, I don't know if this is what you were referring to, Lindsay, but our regional manager for that area did comment early on, and she lives in Boulder Creek, that we need to look at some grants possibly about the roof on the Boulder Creek Library, so that we can maybe replace it with a metal roof, and to be thinking about those things. And I think to Jim's point too, around the air filtration, not just for the virus, but unfortunately it seems like we're going to be dealing with fires like this, whether they're in our region or beyond, they'll still affect us. And that filtering system is something that we need to be thinking about in terms of the smoke. We followed San Francisco's lead when they were closing their curbside because of the when it's over 150, that triggers OSHA rules, and the doors are opening and closing all the time to provide the curbside, and so therefore the outside air really isn't all that different from inside. And then we have these other problems that are compounded from COVID that we worry about, with the smoke exacerbating problems for people who might potentially be contracting COVID. So it's not just like 150 in normal times. Now we're dealing with 150 when people are very vulnerable to a respiratory illness that is so deadly. So thinking about that filtration is one piece of it, thinking about the roofing, and then there's a whole host of other things. I think you're right, Lindsay, that we need to consider both with the community in terms of what they've done beyond just the library, but also then internally for the library, what we need to be thinking about.
That's exactly what I was referring to. And it's really great to hear that you guys are thinking about that. And just, I mean, it's really heartening to hear that, considering how difficult and complex, you know, it is to respond to multiple disasters all at once. So thanks, you guys, for considering that.
Tricia?
Lindsay, I really appreciate you bringing that up. And Eric, I know you've worked so hard on that resilience program. I've attended several of them and they're quite good. And it's one thing to talk about resilience of the library infrastructure in a community, but I would love to see some of that resilience programming about people who live in the mountains and you know, deal with disasters and have to flee, and how our community really just stepped up and housed people and allowed trailers in places where they normally don't have, and opened up churches and put in cots. And I mean, it was really beautiful. And I just think it could be a really compelling and heartwarming program. So, I mean, I just encourage you to think about it when you're doing, you know, future resilience programs. It could be really cool to set something up in San Lorenzo Valley and, you know, just hear some of these stories, which are so, you know, just make you feel so great about living here.
Thank you. I think it's a wonderful idea. And I also just want to give a shout out to Sarah, who's doing the technical moderating for this, because she's on that team of other staff who have been putting that program together. And then just a plug, there's a program as part of that series this Wednesday. You can go to our calendar and get the details. I think it's a fantastic program that we have lined up for Wednesday. It's taking kind of more of an academic look at resilience. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little off topic, but Bob, I want to thank you. You helped us reach out to UC Santa Cruz. We have a medical anthropologist who's going to help us examine the idea of community resilience. We also have a professor of history who's kind of taking a global perspective in terms of what some societies have chosen to do and what other societies have chosen not to do in order to build resilience. One of the key findings that is in the science on this is that if a community or individuals think about what they can do in their lives or in their community to build themselves back stronger, it actually helps them in the present. It helps them cope with the challenges that they have from whatever trauma or challenges that they're experiencing, if they're thinking about how they can come back stronger. And so we're going to examine some of that. There's also some psychologists who will be on Wednesday's program as well. So I think it's going to be a really thoughtful and constructive project. And I love the idea of now taking it to that region and really kind of examining with them, what did they do? Because a key component to resilience is those community ties, how you are connected to your community.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Are there any other comments? Hearing none. So Moderator Jones, are there any public comments on the library director's 2 reports?
Commissioner White, we do have one on item 4B, the facilities report. And this comes from Judy Grunstra. She says, regarding the Branciforte branch, there was a question about moving the metal gate closer to Galt Street, the gate that leads to the parking lot behind the library. I believe that rather costly expenditure was due for more discussion with the neighbors of the branch following the City Council approval to move $1.5 million of Measure S funds to B40 and Garfield Park branches from the downtown branch. That ends that comment. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Commissioner. It says, did that discussion with neighbors ever take place? When and what was the result of the discussion? Will the gates remain where they are or will they be moved? Thank you. I look forward to having this answered at tonight's meeting. That ends the comment.
The meeting did take place. It took place, I think, within a month of the original preview that we had for the Bransfield 40 community. It was, I think, mixed reactions in the community, mixed reactions in the staff. When we were putting together the final proposal, I think we all agreed it was very expensive. Right now it is on the add alternate list for the project, and we won't know if it's even possible until we bid it. But it was more expensive than we had anticipated. And really what the issue there is, if you've been to the Bransfield 40 branch, there's a public walkway to the side of the branch. We have more camping probably at Bransfield 40 than even downtown some days. So we've really struggled with how to manage that on site. We do have some fencing, but it's kind of back farther on the property. So I think the idea was to bring the fencing up and secure it in the evening. What has been the most difficult is there's a lot of people that camp at the front entry. And so opening the buildings become rather difficult. And some of the bikers in the neighborhood particularly don't want to extend this walkway because it's fenced on both sides quite high. They find it difficult to bike down it, especially when there are two people going multi-directions. So the bikers wanted to leave that more open space where it widened out. Again, though, I think there was mixed feelings between neighbors who lived adjacent to the property and the bikers who use it as a right-of-way. I think for the bikers, the ultimate thing is they didn't want to see it closed. In the past, the neighbors have suggested closing that right-of-way, but it is a source, especially for students going back and forth to school. So I don't think there's a perfect answer.
Are there any additional public comments?
Commissioner White, there are no additional public comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to member reports. And so do any commissioners have a report they'd like to provide or information they'd like to share? Bruce?
Yeah, Bob, and thank you. Several of us received communications after the last LAC meeting from Judy Gunstra, who we just responded to her question a moment ago. I know that that Chairman White has responded to her via email on some of the very specific items. There were two questions that she asked, though, that I did want to highlight and just comment on. The first one was with reference to the difficulty of navigating the website to find certain types of information. She put a challenge in her email. I attempted to follow it and had zero success. The question I asked myself was, gee, who's the manager of the Felton Library? And there was no easy way for me to find that on the website. It was incredibly easy to find on Google, since there were a couple of interviews with her recently with her name put up there. I realize how busy you guys are and how overloaded in the overall scheme of things you are facing right now. It is way down the list, but I would just ask that somebody put a note somewhere and say, we really do want to look at that, because it ought to be easy for people to find that kind of information about the library. The second one, she asked the question, how does the member of the public bring a concern to the LAC so it gets on the agenda for discussion? To some extent, since I see that she was able to for this meeting, I assume we've solved whatever the issue was. But Bob, in your communication with her, you said that we recognize there are some issues and we are addressing them. Did you want to comment on what those were, or are they taken care of? And kind of just where we're at, because I really appreciate the fact that there are people who do attend these meetings that aren't on this commission. having been on a board of trustees of a library where having guests appear was like a 100-year miracle, you know. So I appreciate Judy and the other people who come and share their thoughts. I do want to make sure it's easy for them.
Right. There are two ways, I think, for people to share comments. They can write or send a message to the clerk of the commission regarding issues or topics of concern. The other option or avenue is during a meeting such as this one, where the public is provided an opportunity to respond and ask questions, raise issues. We had some technical, I think, some difficulties in the past, and then we're all learning how to use Zoom and getting acquainted with its various, you know, details. So I think some of these things have been ironed out, I believe. I'm hoping that that's the case. Anyway, so I think, you know, the technology does present some challenges as opposed to a face-to-face meeting where you have the public public members are in physical attendance at a meeting and are able to ask questions directly. So this is this is different. I have to acknowledge that. We're all learning, but yeah, I think we need to do a good job on that. And I think things are getting better. So.
And I just want to add, the thing that I get worried about is when people individually email board members. I think we have to be really, really careful about the Brown Act. People can individually email you, but really technically, if you respond and start responding to each other's responses, that would go against the Brown Act. And so we prefer to have the communications actually go to Yvonne, our clerk. I think it's also, if people are sending letters to the board, it's important that it be in the board packet because there's a permanent record of the library board's packet. And I think it's just important that those issues get out there. And then there's always the opportunity for people to come. In terms of developing the agenda, our practice has been that the library director works with the chair who decides what's in or out of the board packet. Again, we answer any question any board member has, so it can come up that way. But I think it's very important that real policy issues and discussions occur in these meetings, either in a written form or live, so that we have that record and honor the Brown Act.
So Bruce, did you have any other concerns or issues you wanted to talk about?
Well, just to clarify, if somebody in our constituency reaches out to one of us, you're not saying we can't listen to them.
But one of the things I would encourage, you know, if you're in the grocery store, just talk to them. And again, the conflict is when board members start talking to board members.
Don't believe that that's happened.
Yeah, I don't think that's happened either. But it's so easy to respond to an email and for someone else to say, I don't agree with that. And then you get into trouble. What I would ask, though, if someone has a serious concern or question, to have them write it down and include it in the board packet, because I think it is part of what we're discussing and reviewing and talking about. But again, the grocery store.
Well, yeah, I would just note that the board packet didn't come out until about a day and a half ago. And so I didn't know that it wasn't going. I was surprised that there was not a response on the agenda. And that's what led me to say, I'd like to make a comment here. So.
Rena, you had a comment also?
Just to follow up with Bruce, I am a little confused as to the process for commissioners and also the public to have things on the agenda. So I don't know if that's been worked out.
So it has been our practice that the chair gets to do the agenda, but I have to say that's practice and not codified. So the group could make a decision like that. In the past, people have just asked the chair, can I have something on the agenda.
I wanted to add one other note that you raised, Bruce, around the internet. That is it's the 5th piece of our work plan for this year. So it is a top priority. We did have the board approve that. And so we're going to be reviewing the internet. And that also includes how we're communicating through our website in Spanish as well.
And just in terms of where we are with that, we're really creating the framework for the new internet, and we have to do this background sort of fundamental work before we begin to fill it in and do some of the higher level navigation. We've given ourselves the whole year to sort of complete this major renovation. We did the intranet last year, and I expect it to be done, but I think some of those levels of things aren't going to happen until we change some of the fundamental forms in navigation. And if you want, I could go through that letter. I think the other difficulty I had with that letter is it wasn't sent to me. It was sent to you or to Yvonne. So I can talk to Judy about trying to get it in the official packet. But I think Bob and I did talk about how to respond. It's things like the food and beverage policy is, with our board policies, we determine when we're going to review them, and it's on a board schedule to be reviewed. And then the theft detection system is still an issue that it came up 2 years ago. I know Judy doesn't agree with some of the decisions that the system has made, but I've been uncomfortable in public talking about the strengths and weaknesses of our theft detection because it encourages loss. And so if people have big concerns, we don't feel like we have a loss rate or valuable, we don't tend not to collect archival materials. The things that are valuable, we lock up. So we haven't made it a major initiative. I just have to say, in Minnesota, I did a theft detection system and it was about $1.5 million.
Yeah, I would just note, I very specifically stayed away from the specifics of those two topics. I wasn't particularly concerned about them. I was concerned about the larger issue of making sure people feel like they have a way to communicate. And given that our purpose is to reflect and speak for the community, I'm not sure that saying, well, they shouldn't have written to you, they should have written to either me or Yvonne is necessarily the right answer. You don't want a situation where people send a blast email to every member of the group, because that does put you in the at risk for the Brown Act. But I think people should feel like they can reach out to somebody and say, I'm concerned about this issue, and that's really all I was concerned about from my role.
Thank you, Bruce.
And as long as I have the floor, can I say one more thing?
Of course.
Go ahead.
Happy birthday to you, my dear.
Me?
Yeah.
It was last week. Yeah.
I was going to say, I haven't seen you, so.
I had a lovely birthday. Thank you.
I'm glad. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bruce. So I would encourage people, if they do have concerns, public concerns or items, and if you have the time, to send it to the clerk before our meetings. And as Susan said, then it could be part of the public record. And of course, always welcome to make comments during a meeting, to raise an issue during the meeting. So anyway.
And Commissioner White, there is a public comment on public comment. It's Judy Gunsha.
Okay.
She writes, public comment is a separate issue from getting something on the LAC agenda. End comment.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, hold on just a moment. Judy Grenshaw wrote, public comment is a separate issue from getting something on the LAC agenda.
Yes, I think so. Though there's nothing to prohibit someone from suggesting an agenda item during a meeting, during the part of the agenda where we talk about oral communications. So I think there's several ways for the public to have input in terms of this process.
The only thing I would say is that the public does not set the agenda. Board members have to. And so agenda items can be suggested, but they have to be picked up by a board member.
So I think the goal is to be as open as possible. So I hope that's the case, and we'll strive to do better in that area. Are there any other comments about that? Rena?
Yeah, I mean, is there a way that we can come back to this at the next meeting in November? And like, it would be nice if people had comments from the public, that there would be a way to funnel that into how this meeting went for them and just how the future. I don't know. I just don't want this to be the end of the conversation. I want it to be the beginning of the conversation. So especially on Zoom, I just think it can feel very disconnected, and I want everyone, this is the place where it's a good place for us to get a feel for what the public is wanting and you to get a feel for what the community is wanting. So I just want to honor that as best we can. So.
Rena, do you want to have this as an agenda item next month?
Sure, that'd be great.
And would you like to make some recommendations about, might want to think about ways in which we could change what we're doing?
Okay, I would just love feedback from the public. And I think it's hard because I don't want a bunch of mass emails, because that doesn't seem the right process. But on the other hand, I don't know in between the meetings how someone is supposed to reach a board member, if they're supposed to do that as an individual communication. I would just imagine that could, I'm not running into people at the grocery store, so we're just more isolated at this time. So I think a process that could work in the future may not be working for people at this moment.
Okay.
So I don't have good solutions. I'm just, I just want the conversation to keep going is all.
Okay, thank you.
So if I were to call Rena and chat with her about this topic to bring some suggestions, would that run afoul of the Brown Act, or would we just be a mini subcommittee?
Why don't that would be great if the two of you could do that.
Yes.
Is that okay with you, pal? Okay, good. We'll do that.
Yeah, where we run into trouble if there's, 4 people,
Yeah.
that's a quorum. So we have to be careful about this so that we're not in violation of the Brown Act. But I think, I agree with Susan, I think that's fine. If you two want to get together and come up with some recommendations or some ideas.
Thank you.
Okay, then let me formally just make an invitation to anybody who is listening on this and has some thoughts from the community they'd like to share with us to reach out, email me specifically, and we'll engage and we'll put that as part of our conversation and our thinking.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. All right. Next up, so thank you for that discussion. Next up is the consent calendar. So I'm going to ask the moderator, Moderator Jones, is there a public request that this agenda item be pulled from the consent calendar?
Commissioner White, there's no public comment to have anything item on the consent calendar pulled.
Okay, and so we do have one item on the consent calendar, and that item is the minutes from our July 20th, 2020 meeting of the Library Advisory Commission. It's on pages 9 to 10.
And Bob, there was an error in the original the minutes that were submitted,
Yes.
and it has been revised.
Yes, that was a public comment also we received, and thank you, Judy, for that correction. So that has been incorporated in the minutes.
And just to be specific, under 8, adjournment, the final adjournment of the Library Advisory Commission at 8:15 to the next regular meeting to be held on September 21st, 2020, rather than November 16th at 6:30 via Zoom.
Yeah,
so you would, we would need a motion as modified.
Okay, so
accept the July 20th, 2020 minutes as modified.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk read the roll, please, for a roll call vote?
Yes. Lindsay Bass.
Yay.
Bruce Cotter.
Yes.
Marina Dubin. I believe she said aye. Jim Landreth.
Aye.
Mary Ripma.
Aye.
Bob White.
Aye.
And Trisha Wynn.
Aye.
Okay, so motion passes. So we've adopted the minutes as amended, as corrected for the July 20th, 2020 meeting of the Library Advisory Commission. Thank you. Okay, we're on to general business. And the first item is on pages 11 through 12, and it's the library budget. And the staff recommendation is to review and accept the library budget update. So we're going to ask Director Nimitz to walk us through that.
Jim, I know you're anxious to have new numbers, and I am sorry to report I do not have them. We get quarterly updates from the county. So the first one, I guess, will be now after October 1st. I did ask them to look monthly back at the sales tax because we had forecasted a really significant loss in sales tax, and the staff did look at it, and our grim forecast is what they're seeing. In fact, they're actually collecting slightly more sales tax revenue than we anticipated, not enough to be material though. So I think right now as we speak, our revenue forecast is sound. The thing that is going to change our revenue forecast next is that the county's lost 1,000 homes. They all need to be reassessed, and there are likely to be some significant reassessments as a result. Our properties in Santa Cruz, the physical property itself, holds a lot of the value, probably more so than in other environments, but there's still going to be a significant loss to the loss of buildings and structures. We don't expect that those reassessments are going to start showing up probably until January 1st, but then that puts the next meeting, a meeting where we could potentially get some significant new revenue numbers. We are sort of beginning to anticipate that. We've identified $150,000 in non-personnel expenditures that we've just simply frozen and said we're not going to spend out of these funds. Easier things like professional development funds. which we had sent people to conferences and aren't happening right now. We continue to hold every vacancy open. Our challenge was to create $900,000 in savings this year through vacancies. We're at $888,000, and we just had another retiree submit for retirement. So we will hit that $900,000 goal. I did rescind one job offer that we made in March, and the individual had chosen to hold off starting as a result of COVID. And this person was coming from Canada. And I just finally said, you know, you're going to be at the bottom of our seniority lists, and this isn't ending anytime soon. I'd like to rescind the offer. Interestingly enough, the house that she had been poised to rent also burned down. So she said, yeah, I think the universe is sending me elsewhere. So that one position will also be added. Not great news. I would say though, jurisdictions around us are hitting some very significant losses. We took large cuts in May, and I think both the city and the county waited a little bit and are taking some significant cuts right now. So a lot of the hullabaloo you're seeing in the press is a result of those jurisdictions. And because we did it early, we're not quite in that stress mode. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions for Susan? Okay, I don't. Seeing none. So, Moderator Jones, do we have any public comments regarding the budget report, the library budget report?
Commissioner White, there are no public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Susan, you're looking for an endorsement here, or as far as?
I think just review and accept the library budget update.
So can we have a motion in that to review it?
I move we accept the recommendation on the budget.
Okay, great. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a second motion to accept the support the library budget update, and there is a second. Clerk Simona Vargas, can you please read the roll call for a roll call vote?
Lindsay Bass.
Yes.
Bruce Cotter.
Yes.
Rena Dubin.
Yes.
Jim Landreth.
Aye.
Mary Ripma.
Aye.
Bob White.
Aye.
And Trisha Wynn.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. So now we're off to, let's see, off to the next, we're on to the next agenda item, which is 7B, and it's pages 13 to 14 in your agenda packet. And this is the 2020 holiday closure proposal. And Susan, do you want to talk about that?
In the past, both the city and county have tended to do holiday closures where they shut down most outward public serving offices. We've tended not to do it because we find that when people have vacation time or holiday time, people actually like using the libraries. The problem this year is with the furloughs, we have, and with the loss of significant numbers of staff, we often are having difficulty filling the shifts we have. And as we begin to contemplate holiday vacations requests, there's no way we could honor them and offer the hours that we have. I just personally have found, you know, I'm supposed to take 8 hours off every 2 weeks and take vacations where you go nowhere. And I find just my leaves are building to the point that I'm losing them. And I don't have enough time to take the furloughs off, much less take a vacation day. And I think a lot of the staff are dealing with that. Our suggestion is that we actually close the libraries for longer periods of time during the holidays and send people home. Contractually, I can't send people home. If someone chooses to work, they have the right to work on a scheduled day. What we would do in this case is send a note to all the staff and say who wants to work during these time periods. If we have enough staff, we'll open one library. If we have a lot of staff, we'll open 2 libraries through these holiday periods. In all likelihood, based upon what's going on this year, I don't foresee us even being able to open 1 library. We might get a couple people and then we can have them go and pull books from book drops because they can get overloaded. But for me, this is a temporary survival mechanism to get through the year with very light staffing. Any questions?
Tricia?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Yeah, it's just such a tough year. I totally appreciate where you're coming from. How many libraries would naturally be closed during this period of time? I mean, Boulder Creek is closed. Capitola will not be open yet. La Silva Beach will not be open yet.
5 will be closed anyway.
5 would be closed anyway. And if there are staff that want to work, you'd just open downtown and Aptos or something. Okay, thank you.
I would probably go by the where there's the most business, but it also might look at there's a staff work group and it's all Scotts Valley. It might be easier to just open Scotts Valley. But it tends to be downtown's the busiest, Aptos is the 2nd, Scotts Valley's 3rd, Felton's 4th, Live Oak's 5th.
Rena, do you have a question?
I remember when the libraries were closed maybe 10 years ago or so on that holiday time. So I know it has happened in the past. And I think it seems like for a terrible situation, it seems like a reasonable solution. So I don't think, I think people kind of expect it at that time. So, and you know, with warning, I think we can, with enough warning, I think people can stock up on their books in advance.
I do not believe this is a long-term approach to a budget problem though. I don't think you want to cut off your busy days.
No. And one other suggestion is that I don't know if that's a time where tech might need, you know, people might need tech or resource problems. So I don't know if that's a time where maybe the curbside is closed, but maybe there's other support staff that could be open. Just something to think about.
Our tele-info, we're staffing at 3 times the rate we did before COVID. We are getting a ton of telephone calls. A lot of it's tech questions.
I was going to flag, and I would support Rena's suggestion that if you guys do have a limited amount of staff over those closure days that you propose that could provide that technical support, just as that there's something like folks that are trying to connect and take advantage of those online services that are still available, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Are there any other questions from the commission?
So I would ask that you review and endorse the 2020 holiday closure proposal, which I will bring to the JPA next week.
So I think before we do that, we want to ask, are there any public comments? So Moderator Jones, are there any public comments regarding this agenda item?
Commissioner White, there are no public comments at this time.
Okay, so Susan, are you looking for a motion of support?
Yes, please.
So is this to support and endorse
the 2020 holiday closure proposal?
Okay, do we have a motion to that effect? Bruce, okay, makes that motion. And is there a second?
I'll second.
Give him a second. the motion.
Jim.
So Clerk Simona Vargas, please read the roll call.
Lindsay Bass,
Yes.
Bruce Cotter,
Yes.
Rena Dubin,
Yes.
Jim Landreth,
Aye.
Mary Ripma,
Aye.
Bob White,
Aye.
and Trisha Wynn.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. The next item under general business are the library operational recommendations under COVID-19. And again, we're looking for an endorsement as far as library operation recommendations under COVID-19. So Eric, are you the one to present this, or Susan?
Susan.
Sorry, because we didn't know Eric was going to come. I did it. I know it's getting late. Everyone's tired, but I just kind of wanted to talk about where we are. I just have to say that nationally, a lot of libraries, I think we're running into the same conclusions, that we're all really, really worried about digital inclusion at the time of COVID. So I included some of the information that's been coming out by a group called the Urban Library Councils, which is a group of public libraries that I really admire. I think it's really consistent with the kinds of things we're trying to achieve. In July, we came to you with a technology plan, and we've had some success, and we're still working on some things. We were able to take our 5 curbside areas, expand Wi-Fi across the parking lots by 600 feet, and it's available 24 hours a day. We've had a social media campaign running. We have flags at each site, and we're handing out free Wi-Fi maps. Cruise.io has a map that's Wi-Fi, but they're not free. So we're distinguishing our map from theirs. We did a survey of all the school districts to determine if students have devices and access to the internet. And the great news is that the CARE funds are really making it to the public schools, and kids are getting access to both Chromebooks and internet hotspots. There are still some weaknesses. So we are working with Supervisor Zach Friend, who's going to give us some of the county CARE money to purchase 50+ Wi-Fi hotspots for library checkout. In some ways, we may end up focusing these more on seniors or geographically isolated folks, because we feel like the school districts are doing a pretty good job. The funds for it has just been delayed because of the fire, but I expect to get those in the next 2 weeks. We have had the toughest time trying to get Chromebooks. We've purchased twice and had them rejected twice, so we're on a third vendor. We have provided the 100 Endless OS computers that we got as a donation out of a San Francisco firm, and we've using our partners, giving them to them. So like CASA, AFC, Faith Community, the homeless shelters, some of the veterans programs, trying to give computers not only to places, but people in those programs. And today we started our pilot outdoor socially distanced space at downtown for public computers. Do you know how it went, Eric, or did you get to see it at all?
Thanks. I didn't get to see it, unfortunately, in the operation. I was stuck in a meeting, but I got out there before they opened up, and I'd encourage you to take a look at the space. They did a very good job of making it very welcoming and inviting.
So we're excited about that. We've started free on-the-go wireless printing downtown. This week we're expanding to Aptos and no, it must be Felton, and then the following week it'll be Scotts Valley and Live Oak. We've got triple the people on Telinfo. We're doing weekly tech talks to patrons, helping them with the virtual library. We've had the K-12 digital concierge program, but we've expanded homework help. It started today from 5 to 7. We've got a bunch of projects going with different school districts, like raising a reader, getting digital cards, getting concrete cards. We've got a great program going with the Santa Cruz Public Schools where we're purchasing digital material and they're able to check out our collections with their student ID. And then the Friends are raising $25,000 for digital resources as well. And they have this really cool Susan Orleans event coming October 1st. It costs to get in. The money goes towards a good cause, but I'd encourage you to join us. I know they got a really big gift over the weekend, so we're very, very excited. So then the next real set of questions is, okay, so what next? And I put some information in your packet about the tiered system that the state has gone through. I think this is the third, not third tier, it's the third system with tiers that the state has tried. I actually like this one a little better. It's simpler and easier to explain. Right now we're in tier 2, which is the red tier, which means that there's still substantial transmission of the virus in our community. And if we can stay here 2 weeks, we can begin to really open up retail to about 50% of capacity. Now, interestingly, in the past, we've been in tiers with museums and aquariums. Suddenly, we were moved into the tier with retail, so that's panicking librarians across the state. As far as I know, no Bay Area library, or I also went to a meeting with all the Monterey Bay Area libraries, has opened their doors. The 2 instances I'm aware of is San Juan, it's one of the mission ones that are just south here by Salinas.
San Luis Obispo has opened.
Yeah,
San Luis Obispo.
But it's the one, anyways, the little one out in the country over here.
San
Juan
Bautista.
Thank you. They're letting one person in at a time. And the other one I know of is San Luis Obispo, which, although it's not in the Bay Area, has opened up. But I think people are moving cautiously, not only for staff, but for patrons. I do have to say, we do have the ugly patrons that come to the door and yell at staff, and that's been difficult. But we also have people that come with real medical concerns. And so what we're trying to do with those individuals is mail books to them so that they don't have to come in at all. Really though, the next stage for us is to, we'd like to get these laptop labs, computer labs up and open. But we're gonna have to move things indoors even with the weather coming. Staff, you can imagine, is not terribly excited about this. And they're just frightened. We've got a lot of union issues going on, and trying to be scientific and equitable about the approach and trying to communicate and be open. One of the things that we find an interesting model is Los Gatos, which has started by opening their lobby area as a holds pickup. They have a small browsing collection. You could even potentially have a computer or 2. The concept of that is right now, the staff is working so intensely on curbside. 50% of the transaction is something that the customers used to do, and now it's 100% the staff. So I think you're probably going to see in the next month a movement towards some internal use of the buildings. I have to say the senior managers went in retreat last week, and we went over our mission and our work plan and tried to prioritize what do we really have to get done this year. And then we really took a hard look at our organizational structure, and we're really struggling to staff the things that we're doing. So how do we expand the things we're doing? I do believe we're going to do a major reorganization. We're looking at a planning period of now until March 1st, spring breakish. That's when the 2 new branches will open, being La Selva Beach and Capitola. And just sort of how do we survive and organize in this quasi-open, quasi-not mode. We're doing a lot of programming, for example. Is it all wanted? Is it all good? Is it all used? Is it all necessary? We're really spending a lot of time talking about what are some things that we could potentially not do that we've been doing. And I honestly just have a really long list right here. And all of those have huge impacts on both people's work and their assignments. And I have told the staff that it's unlikely that any of you will be doing the work that you're used to doing, and it's unlikely that you will have the hours that you are accustomed to. And you know, that level of ambiguity is really difficult on people's soul. We have another retreat tomorrow, and we're going to have a preliminary staff conversation on Thursday, because we do plan on changing working conditions. We're going to have to work with the unions on how we're going to accomplish this. So it's going to be a rough month, but we do feel really dedicated to circulation of materials, to programming for adults and children. We feel really committed to the outreach to special populations that we have. And we feel really committed to tech literacy and bridging the digital divide. I think 2 or 3 areas that we really feel like we still have to work on this year, even though it's kind of in the new category, is we have to work on the website. We all agreed that it needs the work. We have to work on equity and equity issues within the library system. And there was one more that I put in my new category, and I'm blanking, but they were all in the work plan. So how do we keep moving forward in this really hard time? It's going to be tough. And I just have to say the union's very activated right now. So you may hear some things. I wish I had more details, but you've got me mid-process.
So Bruce?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we are nearing the end of the second week of being read. So you could very well find yourself in orange next week, which means you could be getting a lot of pressure at that JPA meeting to start opening. Is there any way we can help you guys in that situation?
I have one-on-one meetings with all of the commissioners this week. I know the county really, really wants us to open the building. I think Eric's been really great. He's really our operational manager, so he's just been through so much this year. But he pilots everything and does a debrief and says, what do we need to change? Where can we scale this up? And honestly, I think that's given the staff a place to constantly give us feedback about what's working and what's not working. So really, I do think that we're going to start scaling up access to physical computers. And then the next thing will be starting to attempt holds pickup within a lobby rather than as curbside delivery. And I think we'll be able to probably do that quickly. So hopefully I'll have something to give them. What I've also liked about Eric's approach is that when we have to scale back, it gives us a pathway backwards as well as a pathway forward. And unfortunately, we've had to use that more times than I care to admit. But it's scary because it just feels like you're doing something new every day. And everyone's so afraid of getting sick or making someone else sick. Rena.
I was just curious about taking out, if it was possible to take out the tables and chairs that are not in the computer spaces so that it's more of, unfortunately, we want it to be loitering under good times, but at this point, it seems like I don't know how to make it so that it's a place that you pass through and you get your things and then you do what you need to do and then you leave. So I don't know. Just seems like taking out as many tables and chairs as possible, but I don't know what other things you've thought of to kind of create more in and out as opposed to staying.
So the thing that that the team's been working on, I think that's a stage, but I think that's actually farther down. I think there's a conversation about whether we could do hold pickup in the lobbies and people could go in and you could just do your bestsellers browsing there, maybe some kids' books. And whether we could take like the meeting rooms and make them a computer lab with 4 computers and a separate entrance so that you're really distributing people. Not all the libraries work very well. Aptos has some special issues. Live Oak doesn't have a meeting room. Right now we're using the meeting rooms to quarantine books. So it's just a million challenges, but I think it'd be great to start one potentially where we have the room to do it. Interestingly enough, Felton is sort of designed beautifully for this. And so maybe you start with the right architecture and then work through the other problems. Mm-hmm. The other thing though, I was talking to the Monterey librarians, and they were saying a lot of our patrons don't want to come in the building. They want curbside, and we can't do both because we definitely don't have the staff to do curbside. So to be able to do curbside and holds in the lobby, we can't do that. And I think that there will be a whole group of people that still want really high touch service and don't want to come anywhere near the insides of our buildings. So many challenges. We get a lot of interesting phone calls. Tricia.
Well, thank you so much for all you're doing. I mean, it's such a discouraging time for library lovers and, and for library advisory commission members, who kind of thought we were going to be doing big things. And it's just such a, scary time. But I want to tell you how much I appreciate how hard you guys are working at this. And I'm still going to the Aptos Library fairly often. I am doing curbside. I know it's a lot of work for the staff, but it really works beautifully for patrons. And, I really, Bruce, want to tell you how much I appreciate your attitude about, this is really tough. What can we do to help? So I'm glad you're talking to the JPA members. And, if you can shoot us a line and, if you think we might know somebody or might be helpful, I think that's one of the things we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be advising you on, how to do this well. So I'm just making myself available and really just following Bruce's lead. Thank you for that, Bruce.
I just want to say that, my library usage is not that different. And I'm really impressed by that. And we had a great experience with the telescope. We were on the hold list for a year. And then I think it's policy to drop you off the hold list. And I quickly emailed and said, don't let me lose my place. I really still do want the telescope. And we got to see, before the fires and all the smoke, we got to see the moons of Jupiter. Yes, and the moon was full, and it was maybe like 3 nights out of our 3-week period. But honestly, I took it back today, and I was just kind of amazed that we could do that. So really, so much of what you're doing is really working, and thanks.
Well, I just have to say that we have some great staff, and that was inspired by 2 young women with a love for the stars, and it's been such a popular program. And it's the kind of resource a lot of family can't afford, and it totally makes sense to share it. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. I am blessed with people who don't have jobs. I'm blessed with people who have careers, who believe deeply in our mission and want to make us succeed during really hard times. And in some ways, that's why this is the best job in the world.
Thank you, Mary, for your comment. Are there any other comments from the commission? Oh, Rita?
I do want to echo just how I think Curbside's been going so well, and I've just heard great things. And I just, many thanks to you and both of you and your staff. I think you've been doing an outstanding job in such a challenging time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. Any other comments before we ask for public comments? Okay, so Moderator Jones, do we have any public comments regarding this agenda item?
Commissioner White, there are no public comments at this time.
Okay, so, oh, Rena?
Sorry, I just, would it be helpful to you from us to make a motion or a recommendation for just for you to continue to open in a planned and staged way that makes sense, that you are seeing as working for your staff and for the public, so that I don't want you to feel that you are forced into opening just because of the tier changing, because I know it's such a public mission, and also you are interacting with the public in such a different way than even a museum is. So I don't know, is there anything that we can do at this moment to help you?
It's a really good, you have such a political mind, Rena, and I'm glad you do. What I'm asking you to do is endorse the library's operational recommendations, which I think is good enough, but I think Bob always comes to the JPA meetings as well. And so maybe if this comes up at the JPA meeting, which I suspect it will, it would be nice if Bob could share sort of those sentiments with the JPA. That would help me.
I feel very comfortable making a motion, just that's something a little bit stronger, that we really do support what you're doing, and the kind of creative and flexible and gradual approach seems to be that it seems to me that it's working for the public and the community, and especially as you're addressing a lot of the digital divide and equity kinds of things. I don't know. I don't know how.
I think we could either go with a motion, or if Bob's comfortable expressing that, if everybody shares those feelings that the pace is appropriate, sort of.
Was there a motion? No. So I think we can strongly support this, and I think the best way to do that is to have a motion. So when I go to the JPA, I can say that we strongly support this. And I know in other cases, when I was able to go to the JPA and say this was unanimous, it was enthusiastic in terms of the support, I think that does make a difference. I know when I went to the JPA and made a report about the library not fining people for overdue books. And I think that made a difference. I think that really did make a difference in terms of saying it was unanimous and enthusiastic that we support this, which was in line with the recommendations from the American Library Association also. So and other major library systems have done that in terms of doing away with fines. So I think, yeah, it does make a difference.
Well, I move approval of the library operational recommendation under COVID-19, and direct our esteemed chair to go to the JPA and express our strong support. You could even say enthusiastic, Bob.
I'll be happy to do that. So is there a second?
Second.
Bruce seconds it. Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. So Clerk Simano Vargas, can you please read the roll call for a roll call vote?
Yes. Lindsay Bass. Bruce Cotter,
Yes.
Rena Dubin,
Yes.
Jim Landreth,
Heartily, yes.
Mary Ripma,
Aye.
Bob White,
Yes.
and Trisha Wynn.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous, and I
And
enthusiastically support this unanimously. So I think Susan's right. I think it really does make a difference when I go to the JPA to be able to say that. You all are strongly behind this, and I think that it does make a difference. So thank you. Okay. I guess we're at the end of the meeting. So we are adjourned until the next regular meeting of the Library Advisory Commission to be held on Monday, November 16th, 2020 at 6:30 via Zoom teleconference. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Library Advisory Commission meeting this evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.